Hey everyone, and welcome back. In this video I would like to present you one of my favorite features of this little app of mine, which is the possibility of a user to see a thread of arguments and counter arguments. And the main idea for that is that in a debate, one argument can have many other counter arguments, but those counter arguments can also have their counter arguments as well, and so on. So let's see how this looks in practice, and then we're going to see the code. So let's say that I want to see the counter arguments for this this pro1 argument. For that, I can click on these three dots, which represents the action button. Now I can click on see the counter arguments, and now I'm seeing the counter arguments of pro1. Pro1, because it is a pro argument, it will still stay on the left side and the cons will be on the right side. Now let's say that I want to see the counter arguments of another argument. Let's say this one has counter arguments as well, this one too, and let's see about this one. Yeah, this one also has counter arguments. So let's see the counter arguments of con3. Now pro6 doesn't seem to have any counter arguments. Let's see about pro5. Yeah, it has. Pro5 has some counter arguments which are on the right side, and this can carry on until there are no more counter arguments. What you're seeing here is a breadcrumb, is essentially a history of steps that led to this actual point. So first we've seen the counter arguments of pro1, then the counter arguments of con3, which is a counter argument of pro1. Then we've seen the counter arguments of pro5, which is a counter argument of con3, and so on. And what's also possible with this feature is that you can essentially go back in time. So let's say that I want to see the counter arguments of con3 again. Here they are. Now I can go in a different direction of the thread if I want. So this is the feature. Now let's see the code part. I thought we would start with the database layer because this is the easiest part probably to understand, because there is only one table involved, and the main character, the main trait in this part is the counter argument to column. So whenever a new argument is created, you can specify whether this very argument is supposed to be a counter argument to another argument, and if that's the case, then that counter argument ID will be populated, will be added as a value to this property. So what this means is that let's say that I want to add a new argument. Then if I'm creating a pro argument and I check this box, then I can select to which argument this argument that I'm writing now is supposed to be a counter argument to. So what this means at this point is that if I click on submit, this argument will be a counter argument to con6, and as a result, con6 will be added, the ID of con6 will be added to this property, counter argument to, whenever this whole argument is created. To be more specific, this is the part when an argument is created, and as you can see here, the placeholder for the counter argument to property will be populated with the ID of the counter argument that I have specified. If I haven't specified any, then that argument will remain null. Now for the front-end part, because this seems to be the most complex of all, I thought we would go through the code with the help of the debugger. But first, let's discuss a bit about the state properties which are in here. So first of all, we have the counter arguments of argument ID. I admit that looking now in hindsight, I haven't chosen the best names for these properties, but what this property will do is essentially have the ID of the argument for which I'm seeing counter arguments. These counter arguments of argument history is what allows us to see that those steps of arguments and counter arguments. So if we were to go back to our first example, then basically this this section, this little component here, is achieved with the help of this counter arguments of argument history. And yeah, lastly, here we have the detailed arguments, which are the arguments that we have got from the props, because this page here, this debate page, is server-side rendered. Now let's go further. Here we have the inspected counter arguments of argument. This is probably the worst name that I could have given to this in this situation, because essentially this property will give us the argument that for which I'm seeing counter argument. That's what I meant by inspected. By being inspected, it means that I'm seeing its counter argument. So it will either return me null if I'm not seeing any counter argument, or it will get me the counter arguments of this argument, which you can see here. So here, from all of the arguments, I'm getting those whose arguments ID match with the counter argument match with the ID of the current argument that I'm inspecting. Now let's see the pros and the cons. For both of them, I have a memoized prop, because the pros arguments will be on the left and the cons will be on the right. And what happens, let's say in case of pros, if there is no argument for which I'm seeing counter arguments, then I'm simply filtering out the pros from all of the arguments. That's what I'm doing on this line. Now, if the current argument that I'm inspecting, which means once again that I want to see counter arguments for it, then if this argument is a pro one, then I want the pro column to be composed only of that argument, which is why I'm returning an array of only one element, which is the argument that I'm seeing counter arguments for. And the same goes for the cons. If we are at this point, it means that we are seeing we are inspecting an argument which is a con, because if it were a pro, then it would have stopped at this point. But in this case, it is a con, and in this case, we want to filter out all of the arguments that are pro and whose counter argument to ID is the ID of the currently inspected argument, which is a con. So, for example, in this case, this inspected counter argument of argument is con3, and on the pro column we have only the pros argument whose counter argument 2 is con3. Once again, counter argument 2 essentially matches to the ID for which this argument is meant to be a counter argument. In this case, pro 5 is a counter argument to con 3, as well as for pro 6. And yeah, basically the same thing happens, but a bit reversed for the con. Now onto the history breadcrumb items. Basically, we are getting we are searching for all of the counter arguments that have been seen until this point. We are returning the title of the argument, which, for example, it would be con3, or right now it would be pro 5. We specified the icon, which is a comment, and what we want to do whenever we click on them, we want to go back and inspect that item. That is why it's possible for us to click on this one. And I think this is all that I wanted to show you. Yeah, and this is the function that is called whenever we either click on one of these breadcrumb items, or whenever we do this, we click on this button. So let's actually see that. I'm going to add a breakpoint, and I'm going to click on this. This one is invoked. This is just a small check to not do anything whenever the same counter argument that is being inspected right now is clicked. If that's not the case, then we set the ID of the newly inspected argument, and then we check if this argument is part of the history, because if it is, then we want to go back in time, if I may say so. Otherwise, we want to specify we want to add the new item to the history, which means that we simply add the new ID at the end of the array, because the breadcrumbs items are simply just an array of IDs. Now, if I go back and click on this, on let's say pro 1, this function is going to be called again, and at this point it will be part of the history, which will stop here, and essentially we do a slice. We want to start from the beginning and then at this very point. Yeah, and basically this is how this I would say interesting feature works. And yeah, I will see you in the next one. Bye.